Okay, now that we have the actual party created, it's time to finish off a few last-minute DM-specific items to make sure that everything is linked together. So the first thing you're going to want to do is go to the party sheet. And once you've linked the party together, so you may go through a period where you're introducing each character to a particular campaign. Depends on how you really want to introduce it. You could start with one player and get them going, get them moving towards the next player, or have them all in one spot so that everything is in place. But once you've essentially got the party together, you're going to want to form the actual party in Fantasy Grounds. And you can do that. You can do that simply by dragging the player icons into the actual party screen. And what this gives you the ability to do is a number of things. You can very quickly see all of the appropriate stats and abilities that each of these particular characters has. So you know what their abilities are, you know what their saving throws are, or their modifiers are, sorry. You know what their AC is and their passive perception is. You know if they have any special defenses or senses. So these two have, for example, dark vision, whereas these two do not. You know the race of that particular character, and you know their names and what their actual class and level is. These two items here represent the total hit points that they currently have available, and this will change colors and go down as they take damage, but it will also return to green and increase as they go through rest. Finally, this is the hit dice, or not finally, but this is the hit dice thing. And essentially what it is, during a short rest, players can expend hit die to recoup hit points that they have lost. And the summary, or the total number of hit die that they can actually roll, is completely dependent on that particular character's level. So in this case, they have 1 hit die per, and it doesn't tell you what that hit die is. In order to do that, it's easier to load up the character page. And I have no idea why that is a white square. Let's see. Yeah, it seems to be a white square on all of them. What about on the player side? Of course, I just closed out the player screen, so just 1 second here. I will reload and be right back. Okay, so after accidentally closing things down, I have everything back up and running. Now, if I click here, yeah, it still shows white. On the player screen, it is actually fixed, but for some reason here it is showing white. I'm not sure why. It could be a bug. I will mention that to Smiteworks and see what they can do to fix that. But in addition to that, there are some capabilities that you have available to. Now, I've cleared the screen here just so that we can provide some examples. So one thing that you as a DM can do is you don't necessarily always have to have the players roll any ability checks or any saves. So let's say the party is going through a particular location, and there happens to be a trap that no one has decided to keep an eye out for traps on. Well, you can essentially go, oh, they have to make a dexterity saving throw because they've stepped on that particular trap. Oops, I didn't have to roll that twice. So you click on it once, and it will go through and roll a save for the entire party. So let's just clear the screen again, and then you click once, and it rolls the party. Now here's the thing. This result is visible. Ooh, that's a nice roll. This result is visible to the player. But if you click this button, and I'm going to clear the screen again, and re-roll, you'll see this symbol here. This tells you as the GM, or the DM rather, that the players cannot see these rolls. So it allows you to hide that they just triggered something. And in this case, 3 of them would have succeeded if it was an average 15 saving throw, and 1 would have failed. So 1 person would have suffered the effects of that particular saving throw roll, and in this case it would be Fairfarn Tailrenkin, whereas Clever, Duldor, and Grow managed to succeed. You can also do the same thing with ability checks. So for example, let's say they have to roll a strength check. Rather than have you get each individual player to roll them, you just click that and it will automatically go through. So if you're calling for a party-wide dexterity roll or charisma roll or constitution roll, whatever ability check you need, you can do that and it will automatically go through. Interesting. It might be because I have... Yeah, it's hiding the results in all cases, but I'm not seeing it on the player side at all. That's probably one of the settings that I have. I do believe I went with a... so some behaviors changed between... I suspect it might be the Dice Tower tag. So let me just quickly experiment here. So if I do that, I unhide and I do a roll. Okay, there are shadow dice rolling on the player side, but still no rolls are showing up. I'm wondering if this isn't working, although it is changing the state here. So that isn't it. Combat. I don't think there's anything. GM show effects, show health. This rules, auto death on rolls, rolling on round. And what about the chat box? Client. Show GM rolls. So if I turn this on, and then that is now visible, that little eye should go away. Yep, and I'm seeing that on the player. Okay, so that gives you an example of how to turn that on and off. You'll notice that the dice tower appears at the bottom of the screen here, and you'll also know that see that the visibility thing comes up. So it looks like that visibility tag isn't supposed to be there while this is actually set, but for some reason it was actually set by default. So that looks like that might be another bug that has to be dealt with. All right, another thing that you can do is call out for a, let's say, perception check. So let's say something requires an active perception check. You make a roll, and then you can quickly see that two definitely failed, one potentially might have failed, depending on the difficulty of the perception roll, and one definitely succeeded on that. And I'm not sure why they have an attack roll here. I've never actually used that. So you can actually set things up to very quickly attack the entire party. Did not know that. I've never used that feature. It was probably been there on the Classic Edition, but I've never actually used that function. So as you can see, there's some very quick features and functionalities that are readily available here. Now, inventory. This is going to be one of the more complicated screens that you're going to take to get used to. And that is primarily because of the following. When you reward a parcel, they're there. So let's say the party managed to succeed in getting this particular thing. Oh, that's a bad example. It doesn't have any gold. Let's see, common room. Okay. So here's an example. If I were to award this to the particular party, and you literally just drop it into this particular screen here. This is the experience points, not the parcel rewarding. So you literally drag the parcel into the party. And what it's going to do is it's going to populate this field with these sums here. So you'll see 15 gold, 22 gold, 55, 75 pop up there. And then an item will appear here. Now, if you have an item unidentified, all the party is going to see is an unidentified item is now visible in the party screen for the inventory. They do not get to see this lower box unless you turn on party inventory visibility. But if an item is also identified, it will show them automatically what it is here. I don't know why items start identified. Theoretically, everything should start unidentified, in my opinion, because it's loot. You've identified an earring, but you have no idea whether it's magical. You have no idea what characteristics it's made of until you actually sit there and physically study it. And that's when, in my opinion, something becomes unidentified. Or, sorry, rather, it becomes identified. That's generally how I would play that. So it might be beneficial to make sure that you, before awarding a parcel, if you're going to play with the identified versus non-identified aspect, go through and make sure that it's not identified before you drop it into there. And we'll see this in action once the party gets going. But you as the DM also get to see what the entire party is currently carrying. And it allows you to very quickly take an item. So you can very quickly go through and say, oh, their rations aren't being consumed, so you can start deleting rations. This individual has lost their short sword, so you can very quickly delete them. You can also see who has what for gold in coins. So there's 10 on this character, there's 15 on Clever, there's 5 on Grow, and there's 10 on Duldor for a total of 40. So it becomes very easy to determine what the inventory looks like for the party and what the wealth of the particular party is. So if you're trying to make sure that they don't get too wealthy too early in the game, here's your numbers. If you are trying to make sure that they don't get too overwhelmed with inventory early in the game, here's the inventory they're currently carrying. And it tells you who has them. So if there's 2 short swords in the party, Clever has one, Farnham has the other. If there's a staff, Fairfarn has this one. Things like that. So you can very quickly see who has what. Items that drop into here can have 2 directions of movement. One could go to a party member, and a party member is allowed to drag items out of this particular group here, and they can drag them into their inventory page, and we'll show that as part of the functionality of the campaign. But in addition, the party could decide, oh, everything that's in there should be sold off. So the next time they get into town, you can make a very quick maintenance task of, okay, is the party going through and selling everything off? And rather than go through and role play every aspect of it, you can make a determination as to what the total value of the items that they receive. So you could have 100 gold pieces of items in this parcel, but buyers aren't necessarily going to buy it at the actual value of the item. They're going to buy it at 75 or 50%, depending on how well known that particular party is in the region. If they're not overly known, it's probably going to be closer to 40%, but I typically leave it at 50%. And then once that happens, when you click this button here, it will very quickly convert all the remaining items that are in this window into gold equivalent value. And it will populate the sums of these values, or these particular elements of the table here, with the total value of all the items that just got sold here at the percentage rate that you converted it at. So if there's 100 gold pieces of items here, sold at 50%, 50 gold would appear here and get added to whatever amount is already in this particular box. You can then divvy that among the party members. And when you click this button, all items that have been assigned here, as well as all of the gold that is summed up here, will be dropped and divvied into the party. So assignments will drop an item into that particular character's inventory. Gold will be evenly split, or platinum pieces, whatever, will be evenly split across all of the party members. And anything that can't be evenly split will remain here as the remainder. So let's say there are 6 members, but there are 7 gold pieces. If you click this, it will drop 1, 2, 3, 4. It will probably drop 1 gold piece on the entire party and leave 2 here, or 3 here rather, because it can't evenly distribute the 3 remaining gold pieces. But a better example would be if there was 8 gold here, you click this, it's going to give all of these party members 2 gold. If there was 9 gold, it would give these party members 2 gold and leave 1 in the parcel coin. And that makes treasure divvying fairly easy once you've identified the parcel that they're to be awarded. All right, now order. Generally, this is a marching / watch order. So on the left side of the screen here is a watch order, and generally you get this very early in the campaign, or you might pull them excuse me, at the start of an evening's rest or a long rest of some kind. Excuse me, I appear to have some frogs in my throat today. And what you're going to want to do is there are 4 party members here. That means that they're going to have to do 2 double watches. Each party member is going to have to do a double watch. So just as an example, let's say Dueldor is going to be first. Dueldor is going to be first. Clever is going to be second. Row is going to be third, and that's going to be fourth. So now you know what the watch order is, and when you're making encounter rolls, you can do so on a per player watch, and you know exactly who's watching during that particular turn. Some DMs set this at the beginning of the campaign and just leave it that way. Some DMs ask each time the party actually goes through and rests. Now, marching formation is supposed to allow you to organize how a particular party is going to appear on the map when they get dragged over. The problem I have found with the Classic Edition, and I haven't tried it yet with the Unity Edition, we'll test it out here once we get a map up and running, is that when I drag the party members from this particular window here onto the map, they disappear from this window, nullifying whatever order they had already gone through and set. And that got very annoying to me, so I stopped using it. And I believe, yeah, I think that just centers. Yeah, because you can move the window down by holding down the mouse button. So this just recenters onto something that's visible. So if you move them, I believe, no, maybe not. Okay, so that might plop them onto the map. Now, I could have been using that particular marching and formation window wrong, so I'm going to try that again when we get our first map encounter, if you will, and see how that works. And then finally, the last tab is the experience points award system. Now, there are 2 ways that you can do leveling in D&D, and there's probably more, but the 2 that I typically use are XP awards or milestone leveling, and you should not mix the 2. Milestone leveling is where you can go through and say, okay, the party has gone through a significant portion of a particular campaign. The campaign seems to be requiring them to be at level 2 at this point, so let's level them up. That would be your milestone leveling. So they've achieved some goal that has triggered a leveling requirement. And generally, you want to know where those points are in advance of actually starting the campaign. And now some campaigns can take a tangent, so you're going to have to be somewhat flexible with that. So if in the case of the Mines of Phandelver campaign, let's say completing the first 2 quests that I can't remember the name of the town that the parties initially go to, that let's say the party has completed the first 2 quests that they are given at the particular town that you initially go to, the party initially goes to, and you've decided that when they complete 2 of those quests, that's when they've achieved their first milestone. That would be an example of that. In relation to Mines of Phandelver, I think they get level 2 when they reach that town, because they've already gone through a handful of encounters, potentially, depending on how many random encounters they ran into in their travels there, or some of the pre-canned ones. The other option is the actual experience point leveling. So if we look at a particular story item here, or even better, a quest. So as you can see here, each quest, every one of these is going to have an experience tag at the top, and it's going to be usually based off of a challenge rating or an arbitrary value that the designer of the campaign has decided on. What you literally do is you can drag quest items, which would be anything that's here, onto this box here. And then encounters, which would be any one of these. So let's see, cave entrance in this case. We'll get to this one as to what it is. No experience points are rewarded for that, but this. So they get 200 experience points if they successfully survive this particular campaign. Now, whether they chase off the goblins, whether they flat out defeat the goblins, whether they parlay with the goblins, and talk their way out of it. It's up to you as a DM to determine whether there's an increase, reduction, or maintenance of the XP value here, and you can modify that simply by unchecking that, making a modification, and then closing it again. But keep in mind, if you make a modification, so let's say you deem that to be worth 250 experience points because they parlayed their way out of it, and you're rewarding for the role playing aspect or the parlay aspect of it, then if an update ever occurs to the Mines of Phandelver and you reset the module, and I'll show you that here shortly, after that upgrade, this value will go away. So it'll return to the normal value here. And that may be immaterial because this would be a one-time reward. So it may not necessarily come into play as an issue. But encounters, they go in this particular box. So you literally just drag and drop a particular item over, and let's see, quests. So we determined this one had. So chase the dragon, then they drop, boom. So you can click these two award buttons, and it will split the experience points across the party. And if you've found that you've got too many in here, you can just click this little button down here and remove an item. Or if you accidentally dragged a particular item into here, then you can just simply remove it. Now, I want to point out something. The one thing that you will see is that there is a summary of the name of the encounter, what the challenge rating of that encounter was, the total experience points awarded, and whether it was actually awarded or not. And then if you are always curious as to what this encounter is, because maybe it might be something that you use frequently, you can just click on this, pop it, and then using this button, drop it into the combat encounter. So it makes repeatable equivalent-sized encounters very easy and quick to throw into place. And an example of that, if you're walking through a particular, or the party's going through a particular dungeon that has a large quantity of groups of 4 skeletons, then you can just constantly award and reuse, reward and reuse, and things like that. So it becomes fairly easy to deal with. All right. Now, the other thing that I've seen, you can't modify this window. So you can see here that I'm trying to update the starting experience points here, or the requirement for the first level. You can't do that on the screen, and I really think you should be able to do so here. And I would really request that Smiteworks make the effort to actually go through and allow this particular field and maybe this particular field to be edited. Because one of the things that I have found is, under certain circumstances, I would always want to reward a player for doing something well, and being able to having to go through and open up their experience, their character, and manually apply the experience points into this screen is a bit of a hassle. You're literally 3 clicks in before you get to the box that you want to deal with. Having the ability to make that modification here would simplify things so much. So that is going to be our next item. So Player's Handbook, reference material. Oops. I believe it is Beyond. Is it in here? No. Creating a character. Beyond first level. So if you're curious as to what the experience point table is, this is your summary of levels. So it goes up to 20. And what you're going to want to do is very quickly modify each of the characters here. And you can click on just one single click on these characters, so you don't have to always click up there. And set the next level if you're going to use experience level rewarding. And I'm going to do that in this case for this campaign because I'm not sure why that popped up down there. As I want to show how that actually works when dealing with the story module. Okay, so that completes the next next task here. So let me just try something. I'm wondering if the reason I couldn't add the effects was because, interesting. That doesn't show up on the player side, but it does show up on the... Okay, let me do a bit of a cleanup here. Okay, and so there might still be a bit of a rendering issue occurring. Now, one of these characters is going to have a ton of actions that I added. Yep. So bing, 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 bing. Let's get rid of these. So one of the things that you're going to want to do as a DM is two things. You're going to want to get a screenshot of all of the stats. Generally, with D&D, it's a trust value because the players have the ability to modify the sheet, and it gets very easy to get lost in that particular thing. So you're going to want to go through and do a screenshot and do a quick comparison before the campaign starts and a quick comparison before the campaign ends. And as long as there have been no level adjustments, those values should match, unless there's been a magical item that has come into play or some spell effect that has come into play that has adjusted those things temporarily. And that's really just to make sure that the players stay honest. Now, there are times when adjustments to those values can be made. And in the case of this particular character, for example, anytime they level up at specific levels, they have the ability to increase their ability scores. So the first one comes at level 4, but then they also get it at level 6, and then again at level 8, and then again at level 12. And that is a legitimate period of time as to when these values should be increased. Excuse me. So at level 4, you're going to want to go through and make sure that they've adjusted the value correctly. So that's very easy to do if you've got a pre-existing screenshot. The other thing that you're going to want to do is keep a very close eye on preparation. So if a player is using their, let's say they get 1 daily on second wind, I believe. So short or long rest. So this is a rest. So uses per day. So let's see. So you see here, they have the ability to use second wind. Now, if they use it, it goes away from that particular screen. But I'm just going to temporarily add him here. If they then go through, they move the rest to here and do a short rest, it should return. And that's a very legitimate use for it. But I have seen players who have made adjustments where they unintentionally, or they intentionally rather, add a second. And again, this was the same player that I had kicked out earlier. They added a second one here so that there was always one available, and they were using it 2 times between rests. And I caught them on that. But you're going to want to make sure that these are actually set up right. So in this case, second wind should be used. You must use this, you must finish short rest, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so I've set this up so that they can actually go through and do this. Now, breath weapon, after you use it, okay, so this is going to be the same situation. So you're going to want to make sure that they have the ability to use their breath weapon once before they actually have gone through and run it. And damage resistant is always there. So this isn't an item that is going to be a per use equivalent item, that kind of thing. Now spells typically are already set up to function that way. So if you go to actions, why am I not getting the ability to... What is wrong with your page? Oh, it's because I'm in here. Oops, preparation and actions. So which ones do they have memorized? Now, when they go through and use this, so let's say they cast Cure Wounds, you'll note it doesn't go away. And that is because they have to tick this. And that is not something that's automatic. So casting the spell doesn't automatically use this. And I think Smiteworks should be able to program that capability, but I don't know why they haven't. So you're going to have to make sure that anyone who is a spellcaster is actually toggling their spell slots when they're actually going through and casting. So if you've got a player that is about to cast a particular spell, let me remove this item, then you're going to want to open up their character sheet and make sure that they toggle that. Just simply casting it doesn't automatically use that. Okay. Now, the next major thing that you're going to want to do is organize your screen. And the reason you're going to want to do that is for one very particular reason. During combat, you're going to have a map open, you're going to have your combat tracker open, and you might even have the reference materials for the particular creatures that you're operating. And we'll show you an example of that once we actually get a campaign going. And the reason why that is important is because you're going to need to be able to have all of those things open and still have the room that you are comfortable with to be able to present everything. As a DM, I'm lucky because I've managed to set up a system that has 3 particular screens on it. And because I always connect a player console to my active session so that I can see exactly what the players are seeing, so I know if I've totally screwed up somewhere. Oops, I forgot to share the map, that kind of thing. What I do is I have my player screen up on one side and my DM screen stretched across 2 screens. And that allows me to have my reference materials, my party sheet, my chat box, and a couple of other ancillary windows open up on the leftmost monitor, while I have the map and the story and the story elements and the combat tracker open up in the middle. And when we actually get going, I'm trying to figure out how to do this, but when we actually get going, I'm going to go through and actively record the DM screen, and I'm hoping to be able to somehow separately record the player screen so that you can see the 2 movements separate from one another. I haven't figured out how to do that yet. I don't know if there's a way to do that with OBS, as that's the recording software that I'm using. So that's something that I still have to look into. So that may take a little bit before we actually get going in reference to that. But having said that, another key feature that you're going to want to get familiar with are your story elements. So every module has a series of chapters, is a good way to look at it. In this case, there are 2 pages of chapters. Now, the reason why I wanted to deal with Mines of Phandelver is because it is very nicely broken down based on the chapter items, and it's very easily organized, so on and so forth. And we'll get into how this is all structured out as we go. But in the actual story tab here, you can drop this down multiple times, and you can narrow the scope to just specific elements. So as you can see here, this is chapter 0. So this is your introduction chapter, and they've organized all of the bits of information that you as a DM are going to need in the first chapter, in the chapter 0 element. So you can think of this as like an index of sorts, or wow, table of contents. That's the word I'm looking for. But let's say the party has moved past part 0 and is now in part 1. You can now narrow your scope down to part 1, or maybe they've moved on to part 2, and you can shorten the amount of things that you as a DM have to look through in order to find the page that you're looking for. A couple of tricks that I have found very useful is something like, let's see, is there a map here? This, for example. A party is going to be going through and traversing this map quite frequently. Phandalin, that's the name of that town I was referring to. And as a result, this is a map that you're probably going to be opening up quite a few times. So what I tend to do is I tend to grab the map and drop it into my leftmost quick access button option here. So if I click this, it'll automatically open up that map. And I do believe it's, is it Control 1? No. Shift? F1? F1. So if you hit the F1 key, it opens it up. as well. And then story elements that I'm actively executing through. So there's a couple of things that you'll see here. I generally will have the player map. Actually, I actually have that wrong. I tend to have the player map here, and I tend to link the DM map that I need here. And the reason for that is clicking on these pins instantly opens up the story role that I need. So, oh, they're down here in Phandalin. Okay, so I click on the story elements, and now I have all of the items I need to deal with quite readily available to me. But at the same time, you'll notice something. If I move this window here and then I close it, I open it, it opens up where it was last opened. So this makes it very easy to actually go through and organize your screen. So once I've got everything set up and I figured out how to do the dual monitor recording or 3-monitor recording, then I will go through and show you how I tend to organize my screen so that everything is easily accessible for me. All right, and this is also the reason why I like this particular skin, if you will, or theme, because it's very easy to jam things quite close to each other and not cross-link. So there are some themes that have items that stick out. When you have a window that is this close, if that item happens to stick out here, none of that window is available for the depth of that particular item. So let's say there was a dragon head that stuck out to about where this 3 is here. You wouldn't be able to grab that 3 or the 23 there because it would overlap this particular box. I have found that in the past has actually created a problem, so you couldn't actually physically drag that anywhere. And it would be the same thing for the entire length of that particular box, all the way down to where this ends. Okay, so this, in summary, the story element here, or the story button, is going to be where you're going to find your actual campaign references. Now, there are some tables that are also available to you. I don't know why it keeps opening things off screen. There are encounter tables, but I can't recall whether they appear here or whether they appear. Okay, so there's the individual treasure tables. If you're curious about what the fumble table looks like, for example, then these two right here are a complete list of all of them. There's about 20 of them. And then there's also one for the critical ones. Let's see. Random dungeons. Okay. Don't need that. Not yet, anyway. This, by the way, allows you to very quickly create a random starting area, religious areas, stuff like that. So the DM's guide, or Dungeon Masters, quick roll dungeons, that's these tables here, in case you're curious. And I believe this is the last page. Okay, so the next one that you're going to want are the encounters table. So if I look for encounter, there are a couple of quick checks, if you will. One, you don't need to link to this. The reason being is that if you link to this day check and an encounter actually pops up, it will roll an encounter based on this table. So a wilderness roll for day and a wilderness roll for night allows you to very quickly, I got to do a quick check to see if there's an encounter for this particular section of travel. And there are a couple of ways that you can do this. So you can go to chat, roll it. Oh, no encounter. Still no encounter. Wow. Definitely no encounter on that one. Oh, come on. Give me an encounter. Seriously? Finally. Okay. So now there's a random bunch of hobgoblins. And what you can do is you can actually click this eye. And just as an FYI, none of that appeared on the player side. So all of these random encounter rolls, not one was visible on the player side. So what you do is you click that little eye, or you can click on the title, and it will pop this window open. Now you can actually go through and generate that encounter. So you click generate, and it will create a random encounter based off of that. That gives you an encounter window very similar to something like this, and then it allows you to drop it very quickly into your combat tracker and populates the items on the map as long as they have this checkbox. So within a matter of a handful of clicks, you now have an encounter that you can put into place. And we'll show you how to deal with that as the campaign progresses. So those are typically the next things that I actually go through and set up. And then finally, the last thing I do is I always make sure that one of these boxes here, anything from 5 to 12, reference story modules or locations that the players are currently actively going. And the reason I do that is when you close out Fantasy Grounds, these windows don't open back up. There are modules or extensions rather that allow you to do that. I don't know if they're yet ready for Unity. Excuse me, but generally when you want to get back to where you had left off the previous session, you want to make use of this functionality. And the benefit is F1 through F12 is the default, but if you hold down the Shift key, there's another set of windows. If you see there, it says S. Then there's Control, then there's Alt. But that's not all. If you combine Shift and Control, you get another batch. Shift and Alt, you get another batch. Control and Alt, you get another batch, and then all three. So you have a lot of windows that you can link to, and very quickly get back to them. And you can easily make use of them. So these I typically don't populate until I've done my initial review of the story table. So oops, not on Canada, guys. All. Yeah, there we go. And have gone through, and I generally start at the adventure hook, familiarize myself with that, load up the maps like I've done, and then prep the actual campaign. So the adventure hook here is where I'm going to start with this. So I generally link that into there. And now that I've got the actual hook, technically I'm ready to go as a DM. But you're going to want to read ahead. There is still some homework to do. Now, I've already gone through this particular module, so I'm kind of familiar with some of the areas of it and whatnot. And this run will probably go a little bit smoother than my first run did because of that. But generally, that's what you're going to want to do. If you've never seen this particular module, you're going to want to read through all of these items, and then you're going to want to read through the introduction, the first campaign, things like this. And I believe, yep, so this would be the next one. So that would be part 1. And generally that is this. So Goblin Arrows is part 1. And you can link to just the actual index, or you can actually start with the module. And I always generally do it with the module. Okay, so as a DM, you're going to want to go through and read through the adventure hook, read through some of the details in the introduction, get familiar with some of the suggestions that the designers of the module have provided, and then go from there and use that as an inspiration to be able to either create your own adventure hook. You don't have to stick with this adventure hook, but you can create your own. You can use the one that exists, or a combination of the two. And then you go from there. But generally, the adventure is going to start in Neverwinter. So they have been kind enough to provide you a description that you as the DM can throw into the chat box here. And I'm not going to do that now. That's actually running the campaign. I don't want to do that just yet. So we'll show you how that works as we go forward. And they also tell you that this particular party is going to have a wagon, and there are going to be 2 oxen as part of that wagon. And then all of the supplies that you're supposed to deliver as per this quest. Then everything that goes, that's all going to be on that particular cart. The other thing that I tend to do is once the players have actually accepted a particular quest, I will drop that into the actual list of active quests. And I use this as an active quest list. So if the players ever get confused as to what things they still have pending because they didn't take notes, or they forgot to do that, or they've just simply forgotten, then you can very quickly refer to this particular screen saying, oh, that one hasn't been awarded yet, and say, oh, you still have this quest that you can do. And it just simplifies things, but you got to be careful because they're going to actually get experience points, although in this case they won't. But they would get experience points if there happen to be any in here, and you click the award thing, and it will automatically tag it. So it's a bit tricky to do, but it is something that can be done. Okay. Now, I will introduce the combat tracker. Oops, I better remove this guy from... that's not what I want. Bing. I will introduce the combat tracker a little bit later. Now, something that I didn't cover on this, and lighting isn't working yet. Modifiers, they're kind of there. And the effects. And the effects and the combat tracker I will introduce during an actual combat encounter, which is very early in the campaign, so it's very easy to deal with. But I'm not going to worry about that just yet. And I will show you how to deal with the maps as well during that particular encounter, and how you can use them to move characters around and attach campaign or party members to that and all that. So I'm going to end that particular element of the tutorial here. You're pretty much set up, ready to go to run your campaign. And from going forward, what this will be is actually running the campaign and showing the players how to use Fantasy Grounds to move around and to execute their actions and things like that. So I'm thinking we literally have a handful of tutorials left. But then I'm also going to go into greater detail on things like all of the various dice options. Go into creating effects in greater detail and how to apply them once we start getting up a couple of levels. And add a little bit more, add value to the overall quest. And who knows, maybe I run through the whole Mines of Phandelver campaign as part of that, because I found that there are some items in here that can be rewarded that aren't properly set up to link their damage, their effects, things like that, and show you some of the solutions that I had to come up with. And I'm hoping that those are fixed now with the Unity version and all the changes since I've last run Mines of Phandelver. But that'll be it for this particular session. This gets you all set up, ready to go. So I will see you in the next video.